Morning, everyone, and welcome to just people are coming in. Welcome to this Skills at Scale webinar with respect to data fluency. I'm just going to let people come in very quickly, and then there's a few things I just want to cover before we start our webinar with respect to some key dates that are coming up. But first of all, I do want to just do a small personal thing. I want to say happy birthday to my son Dylan, because he sees me so often in front of this. He thinks I'm a television star now, and he wants me to say hello to him. So happy birthday to Dylan. He's 4 today, and I hope he has lots of surprises. Okay, so with respect to next key dates, the next big date obviously is December the 10th, and you should be working towards that in terms of progressing the various pathways that you're on. We already had someone who's been very enthusiastic and got to the finish line and is now on to a second one. So the benchmark has been set. I joke, but it's good to see that some people are obviously having a good experience and enjoying it. Hopefully you all are having a good experience and enjoying it. The next week, what we'll do is we also want to send out a questionnaire, and the questionnaire will look at your experience of the last couple of weeks in terms of the type of engagement model that we have, the prompts that you're receiving, how we prepared, how we launched it. So very much around the start of the program. The second questionnaire then will be about, the experience, the content, the quality, and so on. So just be aware of that. Keep an eye out for it. That's the questionnaire for next week. In addition to that, on December the 8th, we will have our Power of Applied Intelligence webinar, which is not part of the pilot, but are covering topics related to business and related to the whole area of artificial intelligence organizations. It's called Transforming Business to Become AI Ready. As I said, it's on December the 8th. If you go over to Technology ICT SkillNet, you can register for the webinar. I'll have Dr. Hesham Shokri, who's head of AI engineering at EY, Amelia Kelly, who's from Soapbox Labs. She's a technology expert around speech. And we'll have John Dorkin, who's a digital transformation expert at Enterprise Ireland. And I said we'll be looking at, what does an AI organization look like? What are the structures? How do you start building expertise? Very much aligned to what we're trying to do with the Skills at Scale program in terms of building skills. But today is about putting AI in context, and it's an important part of us enriching the pilot. What we're trying to do is demonstrate what you're learning within a business context. And today we're going to look at the whole area of data fluency. And the old saying is, you can't make bricks without clay. Without data, you simply can't build artificial intelligence applications. And what's of particular relevance is your own data and how you curate that data, because that's very distinct to your own organization, and it gives you a competitive advantage. So putting a maturity around that, putting a structure around that is very important. And we have Adel, who's here from DataCamp. He's an educator, and from what I can see, very much an evangelist for data science. And he's going to discuss the whole area of data fluency, how you should measure your maturity, but more important, how do you improve and move up the maturity ladder. So I'm going to pass over to Adel. At the end, people can forward some questions, and in addition to that, we'll leave a little bit of time. Shane may want to just come in and talk about the pilot, maybe particular things that he's noted about what people are doing, or just some recommendations about as you're going through the tracks. So I'll pass it over to Adel. Adel, over to you in terms of the presentation. And as I said, be about 35 minutes. And then what we'll do is we'll have a Q&A, and Shane will come in with respect to the pilot if there's key things.
Thank you so much, Anthony, for the very warm introduction, and definitely happy birthday to Dylan as well. Now I'm gonna share my screen here. I hope you can see it. Yes. Can you see my screen? Okay, awesome. So I'm going to just begin quickly. I know that we have 35 minutes. Just a bit about me. I'm a graduate in economics from the American University of Beirut. I have a master's degree in business analytics and data science from ESSEC and Centrale Supérec in Paris. But I've also been a data science educator for the past 3 years at DataCamp and most recently an Evangelist. So I host a lot of webinars on data science. I'm also host of the Data Frame podcast. So if you're ever interested in a podcast hosting analytics leaders and data leaders talking about how they're creating data-driven cultures and building data-driven organizations, this is the place for you. Now, also a bit on DataCamp for those who are not familiar with it. DataCamp's mission is to democratize data skills for everyone. We do this by building a hands-on skill building platform that is all interactive in the browser, covering most data tools and technologies and the latest data concepts with instant feedback that provides learners the ability to move quickly and break the coding barrier at scale. We also provide professional certification, which means providing organizations an effective way to certify their people in modern data skills, enabling them to improve retention and to create data science best practices within their organizations. And finally, we also have our Workspace platform, which allows data practitioners to get started with data science at zero barrier to entry, directly start applying their own learnings directly in the browser using their own data. Now that we have finished this section where we plug DataCamp, there's one final slide. That's why we've been trusted by more than 2,000 data-driven companies to transform the way that they do business. So now that we've ended the plug for DataCamp, I want to set the stage for today's conversation, kind of discuss why it's important to underline the data fluency of organizations as well as the different maturity curves and what's really prompted this presentation. If you want to think about the data science revolution and how it's really covered in the news and popular media and mainstream media, you really get to see a lot of use cases that revolve around making the impossible possible. So these are key use cases like protein folding that was solved by DeepMind last year, or self-driving cars, which are being pioneered by Tesla and Waymo and other organizations, or for example, DeepMind conquering Go. Most recently, OpenAI's GPT-3 has been very much so revelatory, and these types of AI use cases that make the impossible possible. But if you want to contextualize these use cases through a XY axis of how hard is it to do to how many people can do it, a lot of these use cases tend to really stay in the specialist realm, and they require a lot of technical as well as specialized skill sets. But we'd argue that the real data science revolution is about making the possible widespread. So simple forecasts and the ability to work with simple AI systems, working with dashboards, databases. This is the real hidden data science revolution because it enables organizations and societies at large to make data-driven decisions and make use of the data that they generate. So to achieve that, though, organizations need to follow a framework on becoming data fluent. And the path to data fluency depends on multiple levers. So the first one being infrastructure. Means data is collected, it's discoverable, it's reliable, it's understood, it's compliant and actionable throughout the organization. Everyone who has the permissions to access a particular piece of data has access to the most up-to-date, highest quality version of that particular data. The second one is people, which is arguably the most important one because it requires skills transformation, culture transformation, where everyone has the skills necessary to work with and understand data. And this is where continuous learning is part of the data culture. Now, these are the two base levers in the framework that we call the IPTOP framework at DataCamp. The reason why is because these are the two base pillars that kind of create and sustain an environment where you can become data-driven. The remaining pillars that take you above the finish line here are tools, organization, and processes, hence the name IPTOP, IPTOP. So the type of data tools data practitioners and experts use across different skill levels, and also the availability of templates and frameworks that kind of reduce the barrier to entry to working with data, as well as different organizational models, how different teams are structured to enable data-driven decision-making at scale, as well as the processes that scale collaboration and efficiency and ensuring alignment. So as a recap and as a framework to kind of advance to data fluency or to become a data-driven organization, it's important to build out the first two layers of infrastructure and people, which means the ability to provide data access, as well as the ability to create or the data culture as well as the data skills within the organization. And finally, the supporting layers or levers to create a data-driven organization are tools, the different tools people use, how data teams are organized and data talent is organized, and what are the talent processes that you use in a data-driven organization. However, given this particular framework, it's also important to contextualize the data maturity of organization. So we've worked a lot with organizations, helping them transform their workforce into a data-driven one. We worked with a lot of data leaders, chief data officers, chief learning officers, and we see that there's a common pattern between different types of organization where we can say that there are 4 different maturity levels. Of course, this is more of a spectrum, but to simplify it here, 4 different maturity levels that can be really taken through or seen through the usage of data throughout the organization. So an organization can be data reactive, or no one accesses or uses data in their daily work. An organization rarely reports or presents on data on a daily basis, to data scaling, where very few people use data on a regular basis or analyze or present on it, to data progressive, where every team has at least one data fluent employee who can analyze, report, and present their data regardless of role. And finally, to data fluent, where everyone knows how to access the data they need to do their job. And that does not mean that everyone needs to code. It means that everyone has the ability to make data-driven decisions. And we would say that most organizations today are between data scaling and data progressive. I'm sure today's audience, no one's going to be in the data reactive front, but even if you are, that's completely okay, as long as you're on the journey. And what I really want to discuss today is the path from each data maturity stage to another, seen through the prism of this framework of the infrastructure, people, tools, organization, processes, and finally discussing how to kind of scale that and what are the different initiatives you can take from each data maturity level to another. Now, I know that not a lot of organizations today are data reactive, but I'll go through this section quickly just for the sake of continuity, just so we understand what are the different initiatives that can be done at the beginning. So as a recap, sorry, it seems like my slide. Okay. As a recap, in a data reactive organization, no one accesses or uses data in their daily work. So it means a company really presents or works on data. This is really at the early stages of the data-driven journey for an organization. And if we want to look at it through the prism of the IPTOP framework, there's really minimal activity on all ends, right? So on the infrastructure side, data is collected on an ad hoc basis using disparate tools. There's no trusted centralized version or data storage throughout the organization. And on the people side, there is no skills to work with data, and the organization does not have any data culture. Now, since these 2 base layers are not supported, we argue that from a tooling, organization, and processes perspective, this is not yet a priority for organizations should not be a priority for organizations at this stage. So, for example, from a tools perspective, there's a lot of different ad hoc tools. There's no data team or strategy set in place on the organization side. And in the process, any data work is ad hoc. So expanding what this looks like on the 2 base layers, which are the most important to grow at this stage, it means that data sits in different spreadsheets. It's siloed, so a team could be working on a data set, a team could be working on another version of the same data set to a certain extent based on the different processes that they have. There's no alignment on different metrics or different columns, what they mean, or different types of data. There's no investment in data infrastructure, which means that there's no investment coming top down to improve the state of things. And that's really what characterizes the infrastructure side for data reactive organizations. Now, on the people side, it means that there's a lot of gut instinct decision-making over data. There is no specialized data talent like data scientists or data engineers, or et cetera. And there's definitely no upskilling strategy set in place. Now, a recap of or a summarization of different initiatives that need to be done at this stage is really setting the foundations and focusing on building a data culture. So that could be done through proving value of data science with a proof of culture, with a proof of concept. For example, building a simplified customer churn model on incomplete data, just to showcase the art of the possible. Another one could be A/B testing email sends to be able to also showcase what is the value of this data-driven decision-making. And through that, you're able to build strong executive support, because without any strong executive support, top-down leadership that is able to to say, hey, we need to create a data-driven organization, a lot of data initiatives fail at gaining momentum. And a part of this momentum is really putting learning at the center of data strategy. So as an organization develops its data science strategy or its data strategy of how it's going to make use of data, learning and culture needs to be a big part of it. And ultimately, they need to also, at this point, invest in a lot of infrastructure level talent. So that could be data engineers, data scientists with strong engineering backgrounds to set up like databases, as well as data collection practices that are highly robust. So as a recap here at this stage, to be able to transition from data reactive to data scaling, and for organizations definitely develop a data infrastructure strategy to be able to, one, articulate what is the different types of data collection that needs to happen, what are some of the data quality processes set in place. But on the people side, organizations need to be able to prove the value of data with a proof of concept. They need to have strong executive support that puts people at the center, and develop a data strategy that puts culture and learning at the center as well, and develop some of that talent by hiring on the data infrastructure side. Now, on the tools, organization, and processes, would argue that there's no efforts that need to be done here as of yet, simply because it's so important to build those two base layers. Now, given that, we can transition to data scaling now and thinking about how can we go from an organization where very few people have the skills and access they need to analyze, report, and present data confidently to an organization that is data progressive, where at least every team has one data fluent employee who can analyze, report, and present data, regardless of their role. So let's talk about the path from data scaling to data progressive. So an organization that is data scaling has, from an infrastructure perspective, only a few key experts understand how data is accessed in the organization, but there's no organization-wide trust or access in data. From the people side, there's minimal data culture with very few people believing in the importance of data and having the skills to work with data. There's a lot of data skeptics. Tools side, there's mostly legacy tools with ad hoc use of modern tooling. On the organization side, a data strategy is set in place, but there's no data team or data talent that is organized in a very official manner, let's say. Processes, there's very few limited data processes that exist between siloed teams. Let's see what that looks like in much more detail. So on the infrastructure side, it means that there's no centralized data storage. Data sets are still siloed, but there are some departments that are kind of more advanced than others. Now, on the people side, the data culture is articulated as being something important that we need to build, but it's still yet to be defined. There's a lot of data believers, but there's also a lot more data skeptics. And there's a lot of self-motivated learning that is happening by these believers. This is something that we see a lot when we work with different organizations, depending on their maturity level. Now, on the tools side, most data work sits in siloed spreadsheet. There's ad hoc use of advanced tooling like business intelligence tools or even programming languages. There might be some data experts, but there's no centralized data team or like an embedded data team model. We'll see what that means like. And there is some change management that is taking place from the processes as well. Some departments are leading the way, but there's no organization-wide norms set in place on how to work with data and how to deal with data. So the most important aspect here is really reinforcing the fundamentals, such as infrastructure, but also tooling. This can be done by moving to a centralized data storage solution. I'm sure a lot of organizations today here are partaking in some form of cloud migration journey, and this is definitely a part of that. But secondly, as well, setting data quality and access standards. So that means really enforcing data governance, lowering the barrier to understanding of what is the different type of data available through data metadata management tools, and beginning to scale data access as well as provide access to tooling. So that's really one of the most important aspects, to build that confidence in people by providing them high quality data and build the data governance journey, while also making sure that people have access to data and tooling as well. Now, the second most important lever to reinforce here are people. And what that means here is, one, clearly defining what a data culture is, which means that, hey, we need to set new norms and set new behaviors as well as new habits within the organization and kind of define them clearly from the top bottom. For example, setting different KPIs and OKRs for project metrics, defining new reporting norms on the status of a different project. So what is the data that supports a decision, for example, reinforcing culture with continuous learning and support, and like kind of leading by example, where different leaders use data to justify decisions or use data to question and challenge other decisions. And this really creates a feedback loop of different behaviors being picked up over time. Now, the second one is developing an upskilling strategy. And this is really important, I think, really in line with today's conversation as well and today's theme. It's really understanding data personas. So, data skills are not one size fits all. This is something that is very important to be to understand. You may have someone who is a business analyst that needs to learn a bit of business intelligence tools, SQL, and a bit of programming, and that will take them to the next level in their role. Or you may need someone who is already a data analyst that you need to upskill on machine learning and AI applications, and they need to become like a full-fledged data scientist or machine learning scientist. Or you can have a data leader who needs to understand how to consume dashboards and question using data, and that is someone who is a data consumer. We posit that there are 8 different personas within a data-driven organization. All of them are covered in this white paper that you can see below, the L&D Guide to Data Fluency. But the biggest takeaway here is one, understanding the data personas. Who are you upskilling for? Right? And what are the end state skills that you want them to reach, and using assessments along the way to be able to understand whether you're reaching objectives or not. And all of this is also in line with a much bigger strategic objective of aligning strategy to business strategy, learning strategy to business strategy. It's very important to set goals. Not only we want to learn Python, but no, we want to be able to improve operational capacity in our customer success team, for example, by using dashboards and analytics by 20, 30%, and work back from the skills needed to be able to reach that point. So this ultimately requires understanding the different relationships with data people have, as well as the current organizational skill level. Now, the third element here, which is also very cultural, is rewarding the change agents. So there's definitely data champions within any organization, people who take the initiative to learn, take the initiative of using data, setting up dashboards, any of that type of stuff. It's very important to reward these people, promote and empower them, evangelize their work, and increase the visibility of their work. And that can happen through public recognition, knowledge portals, tech talks that you can host, and really about creating an organizational culture that empowers change agents in that regards. Now, on the organization side, here we start seeing organizations kind of formalizing their data science teams and their data science practice. Now, enterprise organizations usually set up something what is called the Data Science Center of Excellence or an AI Center of Excellence. And it's a centralized data team that kind of sets the best practices for data science within the organization. But it's also, we've also seen embedded models where, for example, a data scientist would join the marketing team or would join the product team. And that would start setting the data science best practices for that particular team. Now we can dedicate 10, 15 minutes talking about the pros and cons of each model, but just for the sake of brevity, it's definitely important to start formalizing at this point, regardless of the choice that you make, whether centralized or decentralized, to formalize how data teams are organized. This leads us to here a recap. On the infrastructure side, it's very important to migrate data to a centralized data storage solution, establish data governance and quality norms, and define data access and how that looks like. On the people side, it's very important to reward change agents, data leaders, define and promote data culture with metrics, data-driven reporting, learning sessions, and transparency. It's very important to have clear expectations of what a data culture looks like at your organization, and then set the stage for organization-wide data upskilling. So being able to kind of first roll out like a learning program, create an upskilling strategy, and then scale it out in the long term to accommodate more and more people. On the tool side, important to provide access to inclusive modern tooling. That could be business intelligence tools like Tableau, for example, to programming languages like Python or R, and align tooling with the infrastructure, because there's an intimate relationship between both. From the organization side, it's definitely important to define the structure of the data science organizational model, whether centralized or embedded. And on the process side, defining the data process between teams and business units. So how do centralized data teams interact with the business unit? And kind of just setting that deal, that pact in place is a good starting point at this stage. Now, moving on to data progressive, which is arguably the most difficult step to move from, where every team has at least one data fluent employee, to moving to a data fluent organization where everyone can work with data. So let's talk about the path of data fluency here. So as a reminder, sorry about that, Data Progressive is an organization where every team has at least one data fluent person. And what that means is that data is accessible and data infrastructure is maturing. However, data is not easily discoverable, compliant, understood, or actionable. Moreover, from a people perspective, data is seen as strategic, but it's underutilized throughout the organization. Organization-wide data literacy is lacking. So, and data upskilling is still limited. From a tools perspective, modern tooling is accessible. However, there's limited data democratization. We'll see what that looks like very much so in detail. And from an organization process, the data team is set in place, but the impact is limited to requests and to analysis. And it's not strategic boundary pushing projects. From a processes perspective, there's mature data processes set in place, but only for high data competency teams only. So let's see what that looks like in much more detail. So from an infrastructure perspective, there's a lack of data discovery. So I, as a layman within the organization, cannot easily surface the data that I need. There's immature data quality. There are still data quality problems affecting organizations. And operationalization is still nascent, which means that the ability to work with data, deploy data insights, have like a centralized way to work with data is still not operationalized. It's still not industrialized in that regards. Now, on the people side, there's a lot of departmental learning, but no like organization-wide upskilling strategy. There's no common data language. So a lot of there's a lot of different varying levels of data fluency, which kind of makes an easy conversation about data between different teams difficult. And the majority of value being produced by, data-driven folks is reporting, dashboards, insights, analysis, which is amazing. But then at this point, you kind of need to start pushing the envelope and start thinking about novel ways to make use of data, such as AI, machine learning, and different type of steps. Now, on the tooling side, modern tooling is accessible, but there are no frameworks or like templates or best practices that lead to a lower barrier to entry to working with data at scale. And from an organization side, the data team is kind of siloed at this moment as a support function, and democratization is stalled, and we'll see what that looks like. From processes, data processes are not inclusive. They're only specific to highly talented or highly technical data teams. So let's see let's unpack how to move towards the next stage of data maturity. So it's and at this point, organizations definitely need to democratize data access. And what this means is one, setting up data discovery tools. So a lot of organizations, for example, such as Amundsen, Colibra, Uber, Airbnb, provide data discovery tools in one way or another. For example, Amundsen is developed by Lyft. It's an open source data discovery tool. And what it provides, for example, is just like a portal an online portal that connects to your data sources, and you're able to search for data within your organization. And I think there's going to be an example of that. Another important aspect of democratizing access is high quality data. And at this point, organizations need to really up their data governance game. And that could be one, through investing in data governance platforms such as Colibra as well, or TrueDat or Privacera, which really provide data observability and the ability to monitor data quality at scale. And most importantly as well, the operationalization of data here, which means that there needs to be high levels of predictability around data and the type of quality of data that you're receiving, the type of outputs that you're able to produce. So this means that one, scaling, improving all data quality standards, becoming proactive about solving these issues rather than reactive, and monitoring and refining all the different efforts that you do. I think one common pitfall organizations tend to fall into is they tend to treat data science projects or data quality projects or any of these types of like transformation projects as an ad hoc project that needs to be done and like a check off, but it needs to be recognized and internalized that it's a journey, and there needs to be continuous monitoring and refinement. So this is, for example, data discovery tools in action. Uber's data book on the right-hand side kind of shows you, hey, this is the statistics on this table that you can find it here. There's a lineage section that shows you the different teams that have interacted with this data set. Integrity that shows you data quality metrics. Similarly here, Amundsen shows you different metadata regarding to a different data set. For example, who are the frequent users? Who is it owned by? In case you have questions to the data owner, and that's really how to set that in place. Another example here on improving data quality, it comes from Airbnb, which is a very fascinating use case and kind of setting a gold standard on how to monitor and do data quality. So they have a certification process, for example, for their data sets that need to pass a few different quality metrics and quality checks that enable that kind of lets an owner of a data set publish it and say that it's kind of certified as high quality data. And this really increases trust around data and creates a mechanism within the organization for people to use more data. Highly recommend reading these two articles on how they set it about, and I'll definitely share these slides at the end of the section. Now, definitely path data fluency, it's all about democratizing data skills. That is the most important aspect of any data transformation program, because it is the one that requires the most investment in changing behaviors, mindsets, and skills. So I'm going to give you 4 examples here. Accenture launched a $200 million upskilling initiatives. Amazon launched a $700 million upskilling program as well that is all tackling STEM and data and digital skills. Marks and Spencer launched a data academy for 1,000 employees, for example, and getting all of their leadership level as well as mid-managers and above data fluent and AI ready to be able to tackle AI projects. AT&T has one of the most ambitious upskilling program. They invested a $1 billion, 10-year-long upskilling initiative for 140,000 people, and that's been ongoing since I think 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a lot of organizations that we've worked with that have had really similar ambitions as well. For example, we have supported Allianz on their own data analytics academy that have upskilled more than 1,000 people so far in under 6 months, and it's all a testament really to the importance of skills transformation when becoming a data-driven organization. Of course, another one, it's really important to assess and track skill development here as you scale the path of data fluency and understand the impact of an upskilling program. So for example, it's very important to set up like a skill matrix based on like a set of competencies and sub-skills and skill sets that you want to test for, that you're able to kind of per department, per team, per individual, you're able to kind of understand the progression of skills over time, as well as how it's being utilized in the wild. So a good way to think about it is that skill matrices kind of act as a balance sheet for your organization's data skills. Now, when it comes to tools, we talked about frameworks and lowering the barriers to entry with frameworks. I'm going to give you an example here directly from DataCamp. So this is something that was developed by our data science team internally at DataCamp. A lot of people want to look at, for example, the average performance of a course, right? Whether that's the content team, because they want to understand whether there's anything that can be improved. Leadership, looking to look at which particular course areas to invest in. Or, for example, the marketing team looking at whether a marketing campaign around a specific course increased ratings, subscriptions, etc. All of this data needs to be looked at. It needs to be analyzed. It needs to be understood. So our data science team, for example, is that they created a package on R, the R programming language. Package is similar to like an application, let's say, where they have kind of summarized or abstracted away the long and arduous code of extracting different metrics and different types of details from our databases, right? So basically, to be able to get this data, for example, cleaned up the way we want it, right? The source code of this is much longer. It's like 50 to 60 lines of code. But our data science team was able to create kind of like functions as well as packages to be able to kind of abstract away the complexity. And just by using 1 to 15 lines of code, we're able to kind of summarize this entire data set and get that extraction. So they have lowered the barrier to entry for people to work with data. Now, anyone with basic R skills can do this. They don't need to learn SQL to do this, for example. Similarly, for example, Airbnb has created a similar type program where they've able to create R visualizations, for example, according to the Airbnb theme, right? We have a similar one at DataCamp as well. So now that we went beyond tools and beyond frameworks, also it's important to think about organizational model. We hinted about, for example, the centralized, like center of excellence model with the decentralized model. At this point, a data fluent organization kind of has a hybrid model where there's a center of excellence that's setting standards, it's driving a common tech stack, framework, standardization, but you also have data scientists embedded in different teams because they are invested in the success of that team, and data science is no longer a support function that jumps from one project to another. It's you have data scientists that are invested in the success of a particular team and the problems of a particular product or particular flow or vector. Now, finally, on the processes, I'm going to give you an example here of like a very scalable process from Netflix, where they basically created a notebook template. So Jupyter Notebooks is like a development environment where you do data science on Python. They created notebooks based on different personas. So if you're a business analyst, you already have a certain set of boilerplate code already written out for you, just based on your use case. If you're a data scientist or someone working with machine learning, you have your environment prepped for machine learning. So this is one of the ways that they have also reduced the barrier to entry to processes of this kind. So as a recap, organizations transitioning to data fluency need to invest in their data discoverability and data quality, as well as making sure that they move from experimentation to operationalization. But from a people perspective, they need to roll out organization-wide upskilling that's fit for all the data personas, data leaders, business analysts, data scientists, and more. They want to assess and track and reward skill development using assessments, skill matrices, and like really rewarding the change agents, and kind of set the stage for upskilling to be able to innovate with data down the line by going beyond insights and kind of starting to be more proactive around machine learning and the top of the pyramid when it comes to value from data science and AI. Now, on the tools side, very important to develop frameworks to democratize data, lower barrier to entry with working with tools. And on the organization side, kind of bridging the gap between the centralized and decentralized model and creating a hybrid model, as well as scaling the processes for centralized data sharing, promoting collaboration, sharing insights, and more. Now, I'm going to wrap up here. The path to data fluency is really requires a lot of multi-pronged efforts here, as we saw from infrastructure, people, tools, organization, and processes. It's very, very important to keep in mind that it's a journey. It's not one ad hoc project. It's a transformational journey, really akin to digital transformation, data transformation, and requires multiple levers. The most important one of all being people, because it really provides that groundswell of excitement to create, to improve the levers that you see on the tools, organization, and processes side. And given that we really talked about a lot of different steps that you can do, a lot of different, along different journeys, I wanted to leave you with this visualization as well that kind of summarizes all what we talked about today. So with that in mind, I think we would be ready to have Q&A.
Well done, Adel. My God, there's an enormous amount in that. I mean, going from across the 5 different levels, you have reactive, you have scaling, progressive, and right up to fluent. And what you can just see across is the journey that organizations have to go on, particularly as they navigate. And one of the questions we've had is, you know, there's obviously a significant, or there is an investment, a growing investment in order to make this happen. And it's how are companies positioning this in terms of convincing executive teams to say, look, we have to invest in this, because if we don't, we're not getting the value of our data. So what are the types of strategies you're seeing for managers to convince to invest, even just moving from reactive to, say, data scaling to start the journey?
So I definitely, that's a great question. And you can really, there's different types of ways by which you can approach that conversation and being able to garner executive support. I think there's one way of really clearly outlining the risks of not becoming data-driven. I think no industry kind of feels that more than the financial services industry at the moment, with a lot of neobanks popping up, a lot of insurance tech, fintech organizations popping up, and they recognize the competitive threat, for example, of not leveraging data science as well as different digital technologies to be able to compete, but kind of expanding it beyond that industry and accommodating to the entire all different types of initiatives that you can have. A really great way to be able to showcase the ROI of becoming data-driven is by building like a low-hanging fruit proof of concept. It doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be embedded in a business process, but it needs to showcase the art of the possible. And if you're able to get like a 20% improvement on a process through a bit of experimentation with data or through some form of automation, then that is a great way to convince leadership of the benefits of becoming data-driven. But I think there's no better motivator than kind of outlining the risks of not becoming data-driven and building these competencies in-house, as well as starting to push innovation with data science, because otherwise the competition, emerging competitive threats will be able to make the most of that.
So look, if we don't do this, our competitors are definitely doing it. And if we don't move, then we're dead. The other question we've had is, you've talked about manipulating data, presenting data, and then as you become more fluent, you're starting to use that data for things like artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. Where do you see there's a split? This question we've had, but what do you see as the split between, good reporting on data as opposed to using data for AI?
That's a really great question. And I would say that if you want to think about it this way, like there's a very famous visualization that's really been like a cornerstone of a lot of data science thought leadership over the past few years, over the past decade. Really, the AI hierarchy of needs. It's like a pyramid. It was developed by Monica Rogati, and what it says is that in order to become an AI-driven organization, to utilize AI, there is a set of steps that you need to first go through, like one, building the data infrastructure, making sure it's all collected, making sure it's clean, transformed, reporting on insights from the data, and then you're able at that point to start leveraging machine learning and AI at scale. And now in terms of split of value, this is where it's interesting, because AI is not going to necessarily help you make data-driven decisions, right? It's going to help automate processes. It's going to help provide new business value, create innovation in that regards. It may help you provide data-driven decisions with, for example, like a customer churn model informing you which customers are most likely to leave your service. But the majority of value that you can derive by making data-driven decisions come through insights and reporting, as well as really high-quality data that you can actually work on and report on from their insights. So that's really the split that I see. But I find it that AI is really part of the journey of a data-driven organization in such regards.
I mean, I would agree. I think that simply the process of getting data into a format, curating it, beginning to report on it, putting it in a context. You talked about metrics and KPIs. Doing that in itself is very powerful and allows for the types of insights that you were talking about. One of the other areas that you were talking about was the whole aspect of culture. Mm-hmm. And this is, time and time again, we hear about it's a cultural thing. It's removing away from silos, the organization working more holistically. And you've gave some recommendations talking about, centralized versus hybrid and trying to integrate these people into the organization. I mean, the cultural challenge, when you see it working well, what does it look like? What are the things that make the difference between companies that are trying to do it and those that move to a successful model?
Definitely on the cultural side, it even goes beyond just like how you organize a data team from hybrid to centralized. It's more like around shifting mindsets and habits within the organization. There's one really successful use case that I've found, and we actually hosted this on a DataCamp webinar and a podcast with the chief data officer of Allianz Benelux and how they architected their own data culture program. So I'm going to borrow a lot of some of the lessons learned from that particular program. But essentially, a data culture program should always revolve around changing organizational habits. A habit is really, you can think about it, there's a cue, you do a habit and you receive a reward, right? What you need to change in this situation is really what you need to do to get that reward. So to give you an example, a broker receives a request, they perform that particular request using their gut instinct and they receive a reward. What you need to change here is how they go about it, right? They need to leverage data, leverage some of the tools, and provide them with the skills to do this. So the way you're able to do this is best practice number one is being able to drive it from the top. It's very important that data culture transformation programs has executive support, but more importantly, as well as being able to provide people with the reasoning as well as with the motivation to why they need to be able to engage in this transformation program. And this requires a long time. It's a long process. It's not easy. It requires shifting mindsets. And another third element of this is building organizational resilience, right? And this can happen by one, creating a much more flatter organizational structure, but as well as really reinforcing the digital mindset within organizations through tools as well as through upskilling and making sure that there's an important that's an important focus that's being given to how people work together in an age where we need to become much flatter, less hierarchical, as well as less siloed.
And in terms of, I mean, what I think is important there is incentives. If you're incentivizing people, then they will change their habits because there's obviously value in it, and that goes right across the board. We're looking at digital dependency in agriculture last year, and it's going to be driven very much by the EU and because the incentives so where incentives exist, people go. One of the last areas I just want to cover is, as companies move towards this data fluency, they're obviously in a position to start taking advantage of AI. And you talked about Airbnb, and you made reference to other organizations that are moving into that AI space. I mean, what does data fluency enable? What does it allow them to do? Once that data is in there, you have your infrastructure, you have people, you have the tools, it's all working well. What does that then enable for organization? What's the value add?
I think there's multiple dimensions of value that you can have from data fluency, and there's really a lot of ways by which we can approach this conversation. I'm going to kind of divide it into one, what are the use cases of data fluency, and then talk about it, how does it relate specifically to AI, right? If you want to think about it from a data-driven organization perspective, really the use cases of a data fluent or the value driven from a data fluent organization, one is value acceleration. So whatever you do right now, you can do it faster, right? By using tools, by using automation, and by using data. And there's value generation, which is creating new models of value, as well as creating new value for customers in your organization. Very good example of new value is Uber, right? Prior to digital technologies and like an algorithm that kind of matches drivers with riders, right? No one thought about the taxi model as being that. Right? Airbnb, similarly, it's the marketplace for being able to create that, and through recommendation engines, you're able to get a much better type of service. So that's a value generator. Now, data fluency enables organizations to accelerate both of these types of value drivers, right? Because one, they enable organizations to spot better automation opportunities, as well as provide them with the skills and infrastructure to create these automation opportunities. And secondly, they provide organizations with the ability to spot innovation opportunities and to be able to execute on them. Now, kind of related to this innovation opportunity is really the AI component, right? And we all know, for example, that beyond just the skill set to get an AI system, create created, architected, and deployed. There's also a very important ethical consideration when it comes to deploying machine learning models at scale. Machine learning models tend to be biased. They need to work, there needs to be a governance scheme or a governance program that kind of enables the monitoring as well as the refinement of any results from a machine learning model. And without data fluent stakeholders, as in data fluent legal stakeholders, data fluent risk stakeholders, data fluent business managers, data fluent functional leaders, you're not going to have a common data language where people can challenge the AI experts and vice versa, right, to be able to drive the results that they need to drive with a machine learning model or an AI system at scale.
Look, I mean, when you started there, I think a great phrase, and I think all business leaders would love to bottle it, the whole area of value acceleration and value generation. And I mean, that's music to their ears, the whole, building use cases around those two, let alone the automation pieces, and then the opportunity for innovation. Look, Adel, it's been a fantastic discussion, and you're hugely knowledgeable on the topic. As you said, we have recorded the session, and we're going to make it available after the call. I think we'll have to do our usual little bit of editing to make sure that it all flows smoothly. But then we will send out a link to the webinar, so you'll all have it and you can go through it. And I mean, there's a huge amount. I've had some comments saying there's lots of, it's very rich in references, and what I like is it's giving a lot of models and frameworks that people can use and apply. You've given a lot of reference as well in terms of where they can go and look at how this is being done. So many congratulations. You've done a brilliant job and very, very informative. Just Shane, I just wanted to come to you just before we go in terms of the Skills at Scale pilot. You might just want to come off mute. Are there particular things that, is everyone going okay? Is there anything that you just want to call out and say, look, people, can you do some things maybe a little bit better, or any housekeeping things that need to be happening?
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Yeah, I'm going to send out an email today, just recapping progress as well. So everyone should, except for the people that are in the Power BI and Tableau tracks, should have an assessment completed by today. So there should be an assignment for assessments. So don't panic if you don't. It's only a 10-minute job, really. So when you're going through your courses and your tracks, just make sure that you enroll in the track. So there's an enroll in track button, and just finish each of the tracks. It just helps us with the stats and housekeeping to show that you've completed what you've been assigned. So just make sure of that as well. I'm going to put together an email just recapping some of this stuff as well. But yeah, we're a week in today. So we, as Anthony said, we have until December the 10th. I have the assignments due on December the 9th. So really December the 9th, we'd like you to finish up the tracks that you have enrolled in. As Anthony mentioned earlier on, we have one person that has completed the track as well. So once you've completed your track, you're happy to go do another track or learn some more, but make sure you complete the initial track first. Or if you want any suggestions, reach out to myself or Anthony. Okay, so we have a star baker. We have one star baker. Okay. Yeah. All right. Look, everybody, I'm absolutely delighted that you all joined us. I hope very much you're enjoying what we've put together. As I said, it is a pilot and we learn over time. Good morning to Adel, and absolutely fantastic, Adel. Great session. Absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed it. A huge amount there for organizations and people to go through, rich in all types of references. And to everybody else that's joined, and to Shane for answering all the questions throughout last week and going forward. I think the response has been fantastic in terms of getting people, even this morning, some people couldn't connect, and hopefully we sorted those issues out. So keep going, everyone. I wish you all success, and well done to Adel. Thank you to Shane, and thanks to Sarah on production today, making sure it all goes to plan. Good morning to you all. Keep learning, and we'll talk again soon. God bless.
Goodbye. Thank you so much, Anthony.